Function overloading is also possible with your class's constructor. Just like you can have many functions and many class methods of the same name as explained in the last video, you can also have many different constructors for your class. So for example, with this class over here, class monster, I made 3 different constructors because for some reason or another I need to have 3 different scenarios where the constructor will behave differently each time I create an instance of this class monster. A constructor, as we learned, is called during the creation of an instance of your class. When you create an instance of class monster, the constructor function is called. We already learned in a different video how you can pass in different variables to a constructor of your custom class at the very beginning as soon as you create the instance of this class. Sometimes, though, one constructor is not enough, and you would want to make overloaded constructors to prepare for cases where you'd want to construct your instance of the class monster in different kinds of ways. And this can be done exactly the way it is done with regular functions and class methods. As you can see over here, I made 3 different constructors, one without any parameters at all, one with 1 integer, and another with 2 integers. Now, down here, when I will be constructing instances of the class monster, I have multiple choices of what can I do while I'm creating it. Either I can just create it plain and simply just like that, which will probably invoke this constructor over here, the default constructor, or I could pass in some variables over here, some values which will be accepted in this constructor over here. So because I passed in 2 values, this one is called and the others will not be called. And if I pass in just 1 value, then probably this one is going to be called. Just make sure that you have the 2 rules of overloaded functions, which is that the amount or the types of parameters passed into the functions must be different. As long as you got either different amounts or different types of variables passed into the overloaded function, you can make as many overloaded functions of the same function as you'd like. And of course, the program will magically know exactly which one to call based on what stuff you are passing into the function as parameters, if any at all. That's the power of overloaded functions, that even though it has the same function name, but still you can have several different overloaded definitions of the function. Each overloaded function could act differently than the other ones, provided that the conditions meet about what sort of parameters you pass into this overloaded function. Now, talking about functions and constructors, here's a cool little feature that is available with functions and constructors, which can sometimes be very useful. When you make a function or a class member, a class method that takes parameters, like this one over here, do stuff, that takes into it a integer parameter, you can declare in advance a default value to assign to the parameter in case nothing is passed into the function. For example, over here, normally every time I call the function doStuff, I must pass in a integer value, a number expression to be assigned to this parameter over here. However, I can give myself the choice not to have to do that by assigning a default value to be assigned to this variable just in case I don't give any. This is done by using the assignment operator right after the variable name and then giving a value to be assigned to this variable as a default. This is done in the declaration of the function, which means that when you're coding stuff the right way and you're separating the declaration of a function from the definition of the function, then only by the declaration of the function will you type in the default value to be assigned to the parameter. By the definition of the function, then you just leave it like a plain old parameter with the type and the name, and you do not type in over here again the default value. That is just for the declaration of the function up here. Now, here's what happens. In my program, when I call this function and I pass inside of it a value, then this value is going to be assigned to the parameter in that function, just as we've been doing everything up until now. So in this case over here, doStuff is taking now the value 9 and assigning 9 to the number. And so if we print out the number to the screen, we'll see that it contains the number 9. However, if I call the function just like that with an empty parameter list, as if this is a function that doesn't take any parameters, you might wonder, hey, wait a second, if we declare that this function must take an integer number as a parameter, then this is going to make a compiler error because I didn't pass anything inside of it. Well, actually, because we provided a default value in the declaration of this function, then you are allowed to call this function without any parameters, and automatically in this function this variable will have the number 10, which is the default value that we assign to it at the declaration of this function. Default means that if there's nothing else, then use this. And that's exactly what the default value over here means. If nothing else is passed into this function, then just use this number. Over here, when we passed in the number 9 to the function, then it did not use the default value, it just used it used the passed in parameter as we did all the time up until now. However, if we call the function without any parameters, then it will make use of this default value which we assigned with the assignment operator in the declaration of the function. It will use that as the value of the parameter passed into the function, as if we called a function and we passed in the number 10. You can do this for as many of the parameters as you'd like in your function. Over here, I'm making a default value for integer number, another default value for float x, and another default character for character t over here. And again, don't forget to only put those in the declaration of the function. In the definition, you don't have to, and you shouldn't put the default value over there. Just make it look like a plain old function that passes in parameters. And then when you call a function in your program, you can pass in either 0 arguments, you can pass in either nothing into the function, in which case all the default values are going to be used. In this function now, number will have 10, x will have 11, and t will have the letter u, just like we declared in the declaration of the function, these default values. Or you can pass in just one parameter, 400 for example, and that will be assigned to the first parameter of the function, this integer number. So instead of it having 10 as the default value states, instead integer number will have the number 400, and everything else will have their default values. Or if you want, you can pass in two different expressions, one for the first variable number and the other for the float x. And then of course you can just call it and pass in all the different arguments, all the different parameters for this function, as if we were calling a plain old function like we were doing until now, and all the default values that you declared will be ignored. You can even have the possibility of having some parameters having a default value and others not. Right now, this function doStuff must have at least one parameter passed into it for the first value over here, integer number, and the rest of the parameters to the right over here are optional because we have default values for them just in case nothing is passed in. You can have as many as you like without default values and as many as you'd like with default values. The only restriction about that is that all the parameters that do have default values must be all the way to the right of the declaration of your function. So you cannot, for example, start off with one that has a default value and then start having those that don't have a default value. You must organize the order of your parameters in a way that all those that do have default values are all the way to the right, and those without default values all the way to the left of the parentheses of the declaration of your function.